Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Lotem Peled, and I'm a data scientist and NLP researcher at Fiverr, and a recent Technion graduate with a master's in NLP. And today I'm going to present two creative ways to obtain label data, which is a problem I'm sure a lot of you have encountered. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about labels and show why they are sometimes more complicated than we think that they are. So let's say that I want to build a cat detector. I want to take an image as an input and say whether or not there's a cat in the image. So in this case, my label is a Boolean value, right? That indicates whether or not there's a cat in the image. Just a simple Boolean value that any crowdsourcing could provide me with, and there are a lot of data sets available online. So this is one kind of label. Let's look at an NLP problem. Sentiment analysis. So when we're talking about sentiment analysis, what are my labels? So my labels would be the positivity or negativity score for a sentence or a paragraph or a movie review. So in this case, these are my labels. And this is also relatively easy because a lot of people can read and just, comment whether or not this was a positive or a negative review. So these are also labels that are relatively easy to obtain. But labels don't always have to be Boolean values. They can also be numerical values, of course. So for example, if I'm interested in a regression model, so predicting your salary as a function of how many years of experience you have. What are my labels in this case? So in this case, my label would be the list of salaries compatible with every amount of years of experience. Right? This is what I would need for a regression model. It's a different kind of label. But let's take it to an even more complex level. What about machine translation? So in machine translation, say that I'm interested in building a system that translates from Hebrew to English. In this case, the word hello is a label. It's the label for the word shalom in Hebrew. Right? So this goes on for phrases and sentences, etc. So even these are labels for machine translation, and that's a little bit more difficult to obtain. So that's no problem, right? Because for us as a data scientist or as a researcher, if I'm interested in label data, I would probably go with one of two manners. My first thing to do would be to go online and start searching for an existing data set. And the answer is very fun for us because there are a million data sets out there. Right, so for sentiment analysis, we have the Amazon reviews corpus, which provides for every movie review in Amazon a grade of positivity or negativity. So if I'm interested in medical problems, for example, a regression model for predicting blood pressure, there are so many data sets for that. And for machine translation, we have the Europarl parallel corpus, that if you're not familiar with it, it's a list of the entire transcripts of sessions of the European Parliament translated to every language in Europe. So this is awesome for machine translation, and people often use this. But what happens when we don't have an existing data set, right? Our next go-to action would be crowdsourcing, right? Okay, awesome. So our next step would probably be crowdsourcing. So let's build our own data set. We can use one of many platforms out there, Mechanical Turk, Crowdflower, etc., and just pay workers to give us label data, and they can do this for simple tasks. But what happens if, first of all, there isn't an existing corpus online, no one has ever tried the task you want to solve? What happens if your domain is too specific? So if I'm interested in detecting a very specific illness or building a translation model from Hebrew to Amharic, we will need a lot of parallel data in those languages, which is very, very hard to come by. What happened if I need expert annotations? So Bella talked about labeling huge amounts of medical data, which is really expensive, and I almost always have budget limitations. So for me, for example, during my master's thesis, I tried to give crowdsource workers my task, and I blew almost all of my budget on labeling that went very poorly because it required expert annotation. So I will use my remaining time to propose two solutions for such problems. My first solution is going for datasets that aren't actually datasets. What does that mean? So at my first job as a data scientist, I was required to build an algorithm for punctuation prediction on spoken text. So given raw text, for example, hi, how are you? I'm great, thanks. My task was to turn it to this text, which means to predict these guys, the commas, the periods, the exclamation marks, etc. Now, this is modeled as a multi-class classification task, and I can elaborate later offline if anyone's interested. Now, to build such an algorithm, what I had to do was show my machine learning system a lot of punctuated text so it can learn the patterns, right? Where and when to put a comma, question mark, etc. But the problem is that there's not a lot of spoken text corpuses online. So I could train this on Wikipedia. I did train this on Wikipedia, but every time there was or mumbling or any human speaking nuances, this would fail. So what I did was turn to datasets that aren't actually datasets, more specifically, Seinfeld scripts. So all of Seinfeld scripts are available online, and if anyone has ever watched the show, you know that Jerry has a lot of monologues, mumbling, etc. Uses a lot of slang. So no one would tell you that all of these scripts are available online freely to download, as well as all of open subtitles in English. These are data sources that would never come up on Google search if you search for dataset or corpus. And they actually solve the problem. So that would be my first advice to you guys. My second solution would be trying out crowdsourcing that isn't really crowdsourcing. So my master's thesis was about sarcasm interpretation. This is a novel task. We were the first to attempt it. And what I did was take a lot of sarcastic tweets using Twitter API. Okay, just scrape for tweets that have hashtag sarcasm in the end. For example, broke my laptop today, EA. And what I wanted to do was translate those using a machine translation model from sarcastic English to honest English. Okay? But the problem in this task is that this is my label. This is my label. My label is an honest sentence that actually says the same as a sarcastic one, and these are very difficult labels to come by. And my solution was going to Fiverr. Now, before you think, okay, she works at Fiverr, this is a commercial, this actually happened like 5 years before I started to work here, so it's a genuine recommendation. So what is Fiverr? It's the world's largest online marketplace for digital services. You can go on Fiverr and search for digital freelancers that will provide you with everything starting from a logo and ending with comedy writing tasks. So I just went to Fiverr. I was able to manually pick and interview each one of my labelers, which is something you could never do at regular crowdsourcing. I was able to make sure that first they have a sense of humor. They have good English, they understood my task. If they didn't understand my task, I could ask for revisions. So this was amazing for me, and it was the way that I obtained my data for my thesis. These are actually two guys that I used their services during my thesis. Okay, so to conclude my talk, every time you're standing in front of a new task and you don't find any existing data set, don't despair. After you try crowdsourcing and sometimes fail, try to look for data sources that are not defined as data sets. So think outside of the box and look for online available pools of data that you can use for your task. And if that doesn't work, or if you need expert labeling and you need to handpick your labelers yourself, consider turning to Fiverr. Thank you very much, and feel free to approach me for any question.